Hello again, Ken Lane here, API Evangelist. This is one of my API Evangelist conversations again, where I just kind of bring people in from across the space who are doing interesting things with APIs and everything that surrounds APIs in our technical world. So let's not waste any time. Let's bring them out here and see who we're talking with today. Hello, who are you?
Hello, I am Sue Smith,
What do you
and
think?
that's a good question, and my description of it changes frequently. How I'm going to describe it now is that I make learning experiences to help people build with technology, usually developer technology, and usually for the web.
So you and I have known each other for a while now, and I think the intersection of learning, education, whatever that means when it's swirled up in startups and DevRel. Uh, what is education when it comes to startup land? What are we teaching folks?
I enjoyed the heavy sorry when you said that earlier. I felt that. Do you know what? It's always been the kind of poor relation, and I'm going to say the age of DevRel. Education was kind of included in whatever DevRel was, which varied wildly between companies, didn't it? But it was always a kind of neglected piece of it. I believe that that's changing because what DevRel was is radically changing for lots of different reasons. I think partly because startups are changing, because the way that funding works is changing. I don't think we have the kind of luxury that we had to not be able to demonstrate impact effectively through that kind of work. I think that we probably focus too much on things like awareness and not enough on enablement. And for me, it was interesting over the years to see that people in more customer facing functions, people who are maybe in the sales cycle, started to invest more in education than we did in developer community settings like DevRel. So there was some understanding that it was a necessary piece of the puzzle to enable people around the technology product. What that looks like in the future, I'm not sure. But I do believe that education is one of the pieces of what we used to call developer relations that will survive.
So DevRel and education and context of DevRel is oftentimes very, I don't know, focused on fun things and what you can do with the platform and the tool. You're very much trying to get people's attention and teach them things. Uh, but they didn't always feel like they were the fundamental building blocks. And teaching and education and learning should be fun and should be exciting. I'm not saying it's not. And what we were doing wasn't that. But do you feel like you're having now the stakes are a little higher and people don't have really the kind of fundamentals that are needed to be successful in their jobs, and you're having to kind of pick up those pieces?
You know, the fun piece is interesting because I think one of the reasons that education wasn't invested in heavily was that it's not cool. It's not like shiny and interesting. But in terms of fundamentals, I don't know what those are anymore. I don't know what the fundamentals are going to be for an AI assisted coding reality. I don't know what people are going to need to know. And it's always been difficult when when you teach people about a technology, it's really difficult to keep track of changes in the industry and ecosystem and to be confident that you're teaching people valuable skills that they're going to go on to use because it changes so rapidly. But right now it's changing so fundamentally that I don't know what people are going to need to learn, and I don't know what they're going to be able to just outsource to some tool.
So let's kind of zoom out, I guess, a little bit to venture capital doesn't always prioritize education and learning. I think we kind of snuck it in as part of this Devrelian concept, but it feels like we're bouncing around. And you and I have been doing this for a number of years, but it feels like we're bouncing around from cycle to cycle, just kind of doing whatever dance is we need to do. And what's the latest technology? Is it GraphQL? Is it service mesh? Is it whatever it is? What fundamentals should the people be learning? Actually, you mentioned I've heard you say it several times now. Engineers and developers, like what do we need? What are the fundamentals for our jobs to help us be successful? Or is that what you're talking about? It's changing so fast and we don't know.
Do you know what? In some ways, it is changing fast, but I also think that the AI situation is kind of forcing us to better articulate those things. You know, a few months ago, when a lot of these AI assisted coding tools just suddenly exploded, and there was this panic that we're going to make software engineers obsolete. And to me, that was a reflection of the fact that we don't have a compelling, robust definition of what a software engineer does, of what the skill set is. And there seems to be this, in my view, misunderstanding that it's writing code, that it's writing syntax, when it's not. That's the detail. And what would be really interesting to me would be for us to come up with a real definition of what a software engineer does. If you look at a more experienced engineer and you were to articulate what kind of value they bring to an organization, writing the correct syntax wouldn't make the list, would it? That's not the skill set. It's a more abstract set of skills that they're able to deploy in different settings, different languages, different frameworks, different problems. Probably the more API relevant piece of that is, I think, a huge part of software engineering now is managing complexity, because we build software in such a modular way where we're plugging all these little Lego block components in. And that makes the managing of all that complexity is a really huge challenging part of the job. And I have a suspicion that it might be one of the parts that is least automatable. I feel like that's one of the pieces we're going to need a human for, because it's kind of complex and nuanced, and it depends on like an understanding of the context, business context, technical context, all the rest of it. In fact, that's a point where I would like to ask you a question. You mentioned online, I think it was probably on LinkedIn, something about AI and that perhaps necessitating a return to the notion of, is a semantic API. Am I remembering that right? I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the semantic stuff it's one of those cycles in the API land that kind of has come and gone several times and and has gone away. You don't hear a lot of folks talking about it. So JSON LD is a semantic way of expressing JSON and using it. But that's part of a larger academic tradition around or discipline around language and semantics and ontology and linked data. And so there is actually a lot more. You speak of engineer and kind of discipline. I think semantics has more of a root in the real world, but it just was never um, deemed useful enough in API circles, and JSON LD is actually very used. It's used if you schema.org. So if you go to schema.org and you everything's represented as JSON LD there. And if you want to zoom out more practical, when you Google something and you search and you see those little cards at the top. So if you search for Sue Smith, if you search for Fastly, if you search for these concepts that are a people, a person, a company. These are all semantically labeled with JSON LD, and that's why you see that card at the top. So a book is a book, an event is an event. And so these semantics are really important, but they're not easy. And you have to do a lot of work. And I'm definitely not. an expert, very new to that space, but every time I dive in and spend time and work with folks in academia who are doing interesting things there, I realize how much I don't know and how much foundation that is language, meaning, relationships. There's a lot that goes into it before you actually get to the actual semantics. There's a lot more foundational things that you have to go into. And so kind of bringing this back to AI, I'm just not convinced there's enough will to do the work there because if we weren't willing to semantically enrich and decorate our APIs before and our data, I just don't have a lot of faith that we're going to do it in service of AI and we're going to expect like AI to do this. And there's a lot of devil in those details. And I don't think we back to your word use of the word engineer, I think we like to play engineer and call ourselves engineers, and I don't think we are. I mean, if you think about building architectural engineers, that are building things and kind of what you were alluding to is, the code itself is just an output, the bridge or the building is just the results of that work. But what are all the things that an engineer has to learn? Physics, geology. There's a lot of things that have to come in to know how if that building or bridge is going to stand. And do you feel like those things exist in our world, that we have enough discipline and have been doing that?
Absolutely not. Do you know what else I would like from traditional engineering disciplines? Apprenticeships. Wouldn't that be nice if we didn't gatekeep the hell out of tech jobs and we actually trained people on the job and you were able to access these jobs without having had access to some sort of super privileged degree? That's a side rant. Lord, I'm not going to go on. But this is really interesting to me because one of the things I'm doing just now, where I work at the moment at Fastly, we have an edge computing platform. So I'm trying to teach people about edge computing. And a huge part of the challenge is conceptual. And I'm trying to articulate to my coworkers that for a technology like that you have to leverage abstractions and mental models and that kind of thing. And so I've been doing a bit of reading about it and code comprehension and that kind of thing. And one of the distinctions I came across was that when an engineer is understanding a system, that the knowledge that they have about that system is both semantic and syntactic. So the semantic knowledge being like understanding how the components interact, how it interacts with the context around it, the technical context. You could maybe even stretch that to say understanding the business or socio-cultural context even. And it kind of sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, what you're talking about, if we did actually invest in that, would be some sort of machine processable version of that knowledge. Does that sound right?
Yeah. No, I think so. I think there's a lot of groundwork laid when it comes to networking, when it comes to how the internet works, how the internet came to be, that people gloss over and people just take for granted at this point, and you don't need to understand it; it just works. But how that large system, the web works, and I think this is why we've ended up with GraphQL and WebSockets and other things. Not that there's not a need for those layers. I'm not trying to bash those, but I just don't think people have done the work to go, well, what are we doing on HTTP? What are we doing with the basics of networking? What models are there out there? What patterns? There's a lot of architectural patterns when it comes to software that are 30, 40, 50 years old. And they're not even near as old as classic engineering concepts. They're still pretty in their infancy. And I just don't think we have the affordances, the money, the resources, and time to teach people these things in their jobs. It's the underlying funding model, the wind's changing, and I don't think people see the negative influence of venture capital in changing the winds and not prioritizing these foundational concepts and people learning them.
Totally. Something else I've started becoming aware of recently, where having lost track of gotten older and having been around in the tech industry for a while, is that for a lot of younger people, the way that they've accessed the web has been through platforms through walled garden and all that. And so one of the things that I'm spending a bit of my time doing now is explaining to people some of those web fundamentals, like why it's a good idea to have your own domain, that kind of thing, that people have just never even been introduced to these ideas, and they don't necessarily have a solid distinction between like looking at an app on your phone and the web. Then there's so much there that's tied, that's part of the same story, because it's about these big platforms that wanted to keep people within the bounds of their apps, isn't it? And I think we have even more work to do now because of that lost on
Yeah.
that knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, when I first early days of the web, I had a client one time who was my best paying client, and he thought the web came to you in an email. Everything, there was no browser, you accessed it through your email. So someone had to invite you. It was like this invite only club. Do you feel like mobile apps of that, TikTok and these things are just the future of that?
Yeah, it's interesting because when people started leaving Twitter en masse, it seemed like there was a moment when people started to become aware of this idea of an algorithmic timeline, and that there was something going on determining your experience and the information you were exposed to that was not transparent and that wasn't under your control. And platforms like Mastodon, I feel like there was a brief opportunity there to use that to educate people, but unfortunately, it suffered from something that a lot of tech suffers from, and that it's extremely difficult for people to use. I've got like 14 advanced degree in computer science. But I've seen one of the things I find really encouraging is that I see young people on TikTok getting angry about the fact that, like, they're looking at the feed on their phone and their pals seeing something different. And they're going, wait a minute, what's going on here? And it's not just the fact that it's not a chronological feed, it's the fact that there's some mechanism that they can't see. And that's a
Yes.
tremendous opportunity for education.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to trigger more curiosity in the younger generations to start scratching at this?
I think so, because especially for that platform in particular, it's such a kind of empowered community of young people. They want to know, they want to understand the mechanisms of power. They want to know what the dynamics are that are leading to the experiences that they're having, wherever it is, including the web.
How do you recharge your batteries? How do you keep your curiosity alive?
Mortgage to pay.
Good. Assuming that you're able to.
Do you know what? I've never really lost my love for doing this education work, because education changed the trajectory of my life. When I was younger, I don't think I had a future, and that sounds melodramatic, but I came from poor background. It was a rough time, and I had access to this course that was free because the Scottish government was funding any software course, and it was a foundation in software development. And it just put my life on a completely different trajectory. I've had so many opportunities. I've had an experience of life that I couldn't have imagined. And I want other people to have that experience. And it's also slightly fueled by the rage at how gatekept and privileged because that fuels me to an extent as well.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key. We got to figure out how to light that fire, keep that curiosity. I feel like everything right now, especially AI, we won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but is just kind of squashing and obfuscating and not nourishing and feeding us in those ways. Um, well, I've already kind of blown we're at 20 minutes. So uh, I could talk to you forever, Sue. So, but that's great about this format is you can come back as often as you like. This is
Feel.
we can continue these conversations and mine some of these topics. But I appreciate you coming by today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. All right. I could talk to C forever. I didn't even look at the clock, and I looked up, and we're at 20 minutes. So, I will definitely have C back. I want to dive into a couple of those topics as well as kind of, I think the education piece and the fundamentals of HTTP is what I'm focusing on. Right now is kind of part of my career and part of the API evangelist message. Something I wanna keep diving into with her and talk some more. So she'll be back. But I appreciate it, everyone. Thanks for coming by, tuning in today, and we'll see you at the next one.